And welcome to MashTalk, our weekly hangout about what's happening in tech. I'm Christina Warren. I'm the senior tech analyst. And if you're new to MashTalk, how it works is a bunch of Mashable reporters and editors get together to talk about what's new and what's interesting. Today we're going to be talking about Windows 10 and all the good stuff that happened from that event this week. If you have any questions, you can ask them in our Q&A, and we will try to answer those from the community. And you can also mention us on Twitter, on Facebook, on Google+, using the hashtag MashTalk. So. As I said, I'm Christina Warren. I'm the senior tech analyst for Mashable, and today we are joined by Pete Patchell, our tech editor. Hello, welcome, Pete. And a first time MashTalker, a MashTalk virgin no more, Carissa Bell. Carissa, also known as Carissa BE on Twitter. Carissa is our apps reporter, and Carissa was actually at the Windows 10 event. So welcome, Carissa.
Thank you. Hello.
All right, so let's get right into it. So Microsoft had kind of a surprise announcement today. I think for a lot of us, we were kind of not expecting them to have an event. A lot of rumors have happened about what we thought was going to be Windows 9, Windows Threshold, and they kind of surprised us with a new name. So before we kind of get into all the new stuff that's happening with Windows 10, let's talk about the event first. So Carissa, you were there. Any thoughts about the presentation itself, and did you get a sense of why they are calling it Windows 10 and not Windows 9 as we were expecting?
Yeah, that was definitely the biggest surprise. Obviously many were expecting to be Windows 9, and they were careful to emphasize throughout the entire event that they really were trying to create a unified Windows that would work across all platforms, and they kind of made a joke about it being Windows 1, and obviously that they made a joke that had already been done. So they kind of, I think, by jumping ahead to Windows 10, they're really just trying to show that it was like a big upgrade, and it was really about making this one sort of comprehensive platform.
Didn't Bellacore, didn't you make some joke at the time that 7, 8, 9?
Yeah, there's actually Terry Myerson. He made
it was Myerson.
The ultimate dad joke, because he said he had 9.
But no, what's interesting though is we also heard, that maybe one of the reasons that it's called Windows 10 and not Windows 9. I mean, a friend of mine, John Masters on Twitter, Icon Master on Twitter, he made a really funny point. He said, maybe it's because 10 to 8, right? You want to get as far away as possible, and that might be part of it. But it turns out there might actually be a technical reason behind it too. I don't know if you guys saw, but there was someone purporting to be a Windows developer on Reddit said that the reason that they can't call it Windows 9 is because there are a ton of programs that actually use if Windows 9 in their code, referring to Windows 9X, so Windows 95, 98, ME, and if the concern was that if they named it Windows 9, that any program calls would get messed up, and that could make legacy programs difficult to bring over. What do you guys think of that? Does that make sense?
I think it makes total sense. I just think if you're still referencing Windows 98 in some kind of code, I mean, maybe it's time to just update your code or scrap it altogether. So, but the whole thing with enterprise systems, yeah, I know. These enterprise systems that are still like doing IE6 or maybe even earlier versions and stuff. I mean, it's not inconceivable that they have some lines on this. So, yes, that's probably the reason. But I think it's a number of things. I'm sure if Windows 9 was a strong enough brand for whatever reason, they would have kept with it. But there's no real compelling. It's just the next number. So it's like the double-digit thing signifies a certain, okay, This is a stronger brand. It's sort of an inherent thing, and like that, I think what your friend initially said actually has a lot to do with it. It's Windows 8. Let's get far away from it. I mean, 9 will be, if it would certainly be just referred as the thing that came after 8, and in the long scheme of Windows updates, hopefully 8 will just be forgotten about, and then 10 will, just be Windows for a long time. I think that's the aim for Microsoft.
So, Carissa, before we get into all the features of Windows 8, I did want to actually ask you, or excuse me, Windows 10, I did want to actually ask you one thing about, the event itself. Obviously, this was an enterprise-focused event, which I think maybe made it difficult because most of the reporters there, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of them seem more comfortable with the consumer elements. So was that any sort of disconnect, I guess, maybe between their messaging, the fact that they were very clearly saying, okay, we're going to open up the command shell, we're going to, talk about these enterprise features, but the audience, at least the reporters who were there live, they didn't live stream the event, weren't necessarily, well adroit to that sort of thing. Did you pick up? Was that a disconnect for you at all? And did it seem like maybe this was something that? What were your thoughts on that? I guess.
I don't know if it was so much of a disconnect as, I mean, they did start off and they said, we're not really going to show off any consumer stuff. We're not going to show you the Internet Explorer, anything like that. And I think part of it, and they kind of touched on this during the presentation, was that they really, I think there's just concern about reassuring enterprises about Windows and the direction they're heading. And they're like, we need to tell you guys, and then, once we go there, we'll go to these businesses, and they're really the people that we're, kind of targeting with this release first, and then once we're there, then we'll go to the consumers, and all the good consumer stuff will come.
Awesome. And actually, we've just been joined by Lance Ulanoff, our chief correspondent. Lance is also a long-time, Windows head, and like me, he's been playing around with Windows 10 previews. So welcome to the Hangout, Lance. You are muted. All right. So Lance, we'll let Lance hook up his volume. Yeah, all right, he's still muted, so we'll let him figure that out, but we're going to go ahead and get into... Yes, we can finally hear Lance. Fantastic. All right.
I apologize for being late. I was so involved, so engrossed with Windows 10 tech week, I couldn't pull myself away until this magical moment. So what have I missed?
So we just got started. We were talking a little bit about the name and maybe why it's called Windows 10, talking about the Reddit theory that because of the calls to Windows 9X could be problematic, but also the branding concern that I know you and I had spoken about earlier, as well as the event itself. So do you have any comments on the name before we get into some of the features?
I guess I feel like with Microsoft and naming, we've talked about this before, that it is not unusual for them to make a left turn to sort of leave something behind when something doesn't work. We've had over the years, for longtime Windows watchers, Windows 1.0, Windows 3.1, Windows 95, Windows ME, Windows Vista, Windows 7.
Windows 2000,
XP,
Windows NT.
Windows 2000. I'm sorry, I forgot Windows NT. So
Windows NT 4.0, yes.
3.11. I mean, the reality is there is no consistent naming protocol for Windows. It's about what makes sense. I know there was some discussion about the idea that maybe this is a programming thing. I honestly don't think it is. I think that Windows 10 works nicely for the brand. I think that it sets it apart a little bit. It represents probably a bit of a leap that Microsoft is trying to leave a little bit of the past behind because things didn't work out so well with Windows 8. But I really think that people should not get too stuck on this idea. I do think that Carissa did such a brilliant job of this. I'm so pleased that she was there because, if everyone remembers during the event, there was a moment where there was a joke made about them calling it Windows 1. And there were so many other people who basically decided it was called Windows 1, but not our Carissa. Carissa, she was smart. She waited, held her own, and gave the actual correct information to the audience.
Well done, Carissa. Well done, Carissa. All right, so let's go ahead and let's start talking about some of these features that are in Windows 10 Preview. Obviously they didn't show off a lot of the consumer-facing stuff. They didn't show off Internet Explorer. They didn't show off any of the apps, so to speak. But the Start menu is back. Yay! The Start menu is back. Thank God our long national nightmare of not having a Start menu has finally been put to rest. So the Start menu is back. They've also brought this thing called a Task View, which is basically Expose or Mission Control from OS 10. People who keep telling me that it's like Alt-Tab, no, it's not. It's a little bit different than that, a little bit better. And they've got some other features. So here we go. Lance is showing off Task View, which, again, it looks exactly like Expose. Virtual desktops are back, you guys.
And Christina, it was an old idea, right? You and I were talking about way back in Longhorn days, for people, again, Windows watchers. Longhorn, that's right. That's when they started talking about different desktops. But they never really built anything quite like this until now, and I actually think this is great.
Yeah.
I love this. And you can even activate it with a 3-finger swipe up on the
Yep.
pad. The touchpad.
Absolutely, just like in OS 10. We'll talk more about that later. But let's talk about some of these new features. So Carissa, Pete, and Lance, you guys have all had some hands-on time. So have I. We've all used Windows 10. Carissa, you did a great hands-on for us at Mashable and at the event. What was kind of your big takeaway, and what was Microsoft really highlighting as the big feature with Windows 10? To me, it seems like the big new features are really like the features that have already been around. Like they almost were like, hey, all that stuff we took away and we hated, we brought it back. So like everything old is new again. What was your take? What's the big new stuff happening with Windows 10?
I mean, yeah, that's definitely right. They were, the start menu was kind of the star of most of the keynote. Like, we're bringing back the start menu. Here it is. Also, there was a big emphasis on multitasking. One of the interesting features that they talked about was they were talking about these sort of hybrid 2-in-1 devices that can either be touch devices or more like desktop mouse and keyboard, as they kept saying, situations. And so one of the new features in Windows 10 is this thing called Continuum that kind of allows these people who have these hybrid devices to easily switch between desktop mode and tablet mode.
Yeah, no, and I installed Windows 10 on a Surface Pro 2, and that's got one of those things. And Continuum isn't quite working in the preview yet, but they've definitely, I see the ideas that they're having with it. I know that Lance installed it on a device that obviously has touch, but is a laptop.
Yeah, Continuum seems to me it's a great feature that, I mean, it's a great idea. I mean, but I'm a little I need to see the finished product, because this is an easy thing to get wrong, and it's what Windows 8 got wrong, which is that you can have a dual mode device, but unless you know how the person's using it in that moment, there's going to be some manual operation they need to do to get the most out of it, which a lot of people just don't have the patience for. So it's like, I'll give you an example. You have a Surface, whether it's a Pro 2 or a Pro 3. It can be at home in a workstation. It can be a tablet. It can be a laptop. And in each one of those situations probably calls for slightly different settings, some more than others. So what Continuum has to do, it has to really get context. It has to really understand, like, I mean, this is going to be a combination of user settings, what's attached, sensors, and all this stuff, and it's going to need to know way more than Windows 8 did what you're doing with the device in any particular moment and sort of reconfigure itself, which of course you'll be able to manually override and tailor to your own needs. But to really work the way, the vision of Windows 8, which had this vision of multiple formats. I mean, that's the whole thrust of Windows 8. It's like we can do everything in one device, but a lot of certain things weren't right about it. And one of them was that this thing where it has, it can do it all, but it doesn't necessarily know what you're doing, and it has to do that.
So Pete, I wanted to be quick because Christina, you had mentioned something. I installed the Tech Preview, Windows 10 Tech Preview, on a standard laptop, and I think that's a really important experience to talk about because it doesn't try to be something it's not.
Right.
It doesn't try and sort of force you to know that the corners are hot, because they're not. It's
corners in Windows 10, hot or not?
Right.
Not.
They are not. It is much more like the Windows but with this really basically better start menu. As I said in my post, that they're no longer trying to do something more or be something they're not. When you're on a standard desktop, you're going to get what I consider a standard experience with the benefits of a highly tuned operating system underneath it. So for me, on this desktop here, it's so weird because I actually forgot what they had removed. And I was, I go back and forth between a Surface Pro 3 and this Acer laptop, Asus laptop, and I tried to go to the side. I tried to go to the charms. I tried to go to the corners, and I realized none of those things work here. But I don't mind because I'm basically just using it as a standard desktop.
Right. Now, Carissa, what type of machine did you test Windows 10 on at the event?
I'm not sure what the machine was. They had a few big desktops out. They they were not touch enabled.
They're not touch enabled. Okay, so that's a big thing. Yeah, so I actually installed it on a Surface Pro 2, and it was interesting because I actually just did an upgrade over 8.1, or maybe it was even 8.0. And by default, it actually did come back to the start screen, meaning the big Metro-inspired screen. That is what greeted me when I installed the system. But when I clicked on the Windows icon, it took me to the desktop, and there was an option in Preferences to be able to set the Start menu to start from there and to make that my default desktop. So I think that's interesting. I'm assuming, Lance, that on yours, it just immediately went to the desktop as the default?
Yeah, yeah, it was so familiar, and at first I was like, oh, so where's the? And then I clicked the start button, and instead of, because the old experience, or the experience
Right.
that I have on a Surface or something, you click that, and then you're thrown into the Windows
Exactly.
design, what was called Metro. Now you just get this start menu that has basically this area that looks like a tiny Windows
Yes.
design with the tiles. And
Right.
I actually learned from watching Carissa's little Vine how to size it, because you can just
Yes.
grab it
But
at the top
then,
and
but
drag it
then,
up and down.
how do you get back to start then if you actually want to do that?
What do you mean? You're in Start. Oh, you
Start
mean
the
if you
start
want to
If
screen.
go?
you wanted the start
Want to go?
screen.
If I do actually want to go into Windows Design, which I freely admit, virtually no one wants to do.
Right.
Well, it doesn't seem to, Christina and Carissa, you can kind of correct me if I'm wrong. The way it seems to work is I can choose to run any of those apps, and I can even get more apps, and then I'll be in an environment that can be either full screen, or I can even
Right.
size it down. But I am never back in the start
Yeah.
environment.
I think, and I would have to see on your setup, Lance. I know that on the Surface Pro 2, like I said, if I have the start menu enabled, then the start screen goes away. But if I have it disabled, then I can bring the start screen back. So I think that at least for the touch-enabled stuff, that's still there.
Which
This is
makes
all a
sense.
Yeah.
preview. Yeah, I mean, this is all
Well,
a
that's the key
preview.
thing for those hybrids that are
Right.
tablets half the time. I mean, this, like you say, this is the preview, and it's just the preview for x86. So
Yes.
we're going to see, and not that Windows RT is going to be a thing. It's not.
It's not.
They haven't confirmed that, but I mean, we
Oh, it's
know
dead.
RT is dead. But there's still going to be a lot of Windows tablets, regardless.
Right.
So, and those
Oh,
are
yeah.
going to need to go back to start.
Absolutely. They're going to need to
screen
have an
them.
easy mode
Yeah.
to kind of switch between the two. Let's talk about the start menu a little bit. So as Lance was pointing out, in Chris's Vines, she showed this off quite well. I wish I could show Vines in here, how you can resize the widgets and you can resize the live tiles. And what's interesting is it works basically the same way. Lance has got this up on his screen. It works basically the same way that Windows Phone works, both with the resizing and with how the whole thing looks. And I think this is interesting that basically the second half of the start menu is basically your home screen on a Windows Phone.
A little
It's
more
basically
centered,
exactly,
Lance. Everybody go to Lance's screen.
yeah.
There you go. See, there you go.
And so, I mean, it's basically identical to what you would see on a Windows Phone, both in making it bigger, smaller, adding in these tiles. And what's great about it is that, and we're going to transition into this, is that these tiles update. So you can have the weather, you can have the calendar, you can have updates from your contacts, you can have news about apps that are available. Other apps can build these things in, and so every time you tap the start menu or hit the Windows key, you can see this stuff come up, and it's really, really nice. So that's, I think, kind of a great way that Microsoft has kind of done what historically they were kind of, but they failed so spectacularly at doing with Windows 8. They've taken the few good things about Windows 8, and we joke, but I mean there were a lot of good things about Windows 8, but they take the things that were not working well on the desktop in Windows 8, that didn't work well at all with that experience, and they've put them in a way that works well on the desktop. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I personally think that what they did is they overvalued the start menu. They made
Yeah.
an entire environment unto itself. And when we first started, when I was writing about Windows 10, I kind of went back to look at the very first post we'd written about Windows 8, and I realized, that we didn't entirely realize at the time that this was an exploded start menu. That the reason
Yeah.
they felt comfortable getting rid of the start button and the start menu was because they gave you a giant one, but they also thought you wanted to live in there all the time. And this actually made, to me, ultimately it made a mouse-driven system far less usable.
Right.
It's they were trying to say that everything was going to be touch. Now, I personally love using the Surface Pro 3. I love
Hmm.
the idea that I can touch the screen and I get benefit. But even using that, I spend most of my time in the standard Windows desktop, and that doesn't make the ability to touch it any less useful to me.
Yeah, like you nailed it. I mean, it's like the start menu is a means to an end. You know, it's not an end in of itself, and that's kind of what Windows 8 thought it was. Oh, it's so you're going to want to look at the start menu, and there's going to be live tiles, and you're just going to want to be in this place, and very few people really wanted to, particularly on desktop. Everyone just, as soon as they got the ability to boot to desktop in 8.1 or 8.1 update, I forget which one it was, but I think they boot there. That's what's going on. So, yeah. So go ahead.
I was curious, Carissa, since you were at the event, did anybody say to you, any of the Microsofties, say, yeah, we know we screwed up, this was, it's a painful time, and did anybody throw Steven Sinofsky under the bus?
Yeah, did he get thrown under the bus at all?
Come on.
Well, he was actually thrown under the bus.
Oh, nice. That's nice. What did you hear, Carissa?
I mean, there was one point during the keynote where they kind of said, we didn't get this right the first time, and so.
Yeah, I was going to say, Joe said something, I think, right? Didn't Joe made some sort of comment about how they didn't get something right about the handoffs between touch and desktop. Is that correct? I mean, am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, they actually said, we think this is a big opportunity. We didn't quite get it right before. And they did, I thought it was interesting, I think Lance pointed this out too during the keynote, they kept emphasizing the word familiar, about how Windows 10 looks familiar and how it's, something that, people who didn't like Windows 8 will be used to, and I think having the start menu sort of more desktop look was a big part of that.
It would have been good if they had listened to my wife when I first showed her Windows 8. I brought home a Windows 8 machine. Her reaction was, "I hate it."
Yeah, that was the reaction of a lot of people. There were a ton of people. I mean, we were getting feedback. I know Pete and I, even before Windows 8 came out, from a lot of developers who were like, you guys, this is not good. We are telling Microsoft we don't want this. And what do you know?
It's good that they ditched a lot of the bad ideas, which I can see why they did them at the time. I mean, one of them was the hot corners. Another one was the charms menu. And the charms menu, while it was, it's kind of trying to take the Android idea of the home button, the ever-present buttons, and putting them in everything. It didn't really work. It's like, I think I used one button there the most, and it's settings. Yeah. Because search, you just start typing from the start and you're fine. You don't even need the search, really. The devices one, I used it once for a printer. And then there's share, which, as I identified when I was sort of first reviewing Windows 8, wow, this could be a very powerful thing as long as developers use it and design good apps around it, and nobody did.
No.
So the share thing was just sitting there. So you were basically reduced. This charms bar was reduced to one thing: settings.
Yeah. Well, I would say for me, Pete, it's search. That is the thing I use it for.
Oh, I use search all the time. I just don't go to the bar. You can start typing from start.
Well, what's funny? I hit the start button. I hit the Windows button on my key, which pops up the search charm, and then I start typing. So this happens. That's kind of become a reflex for me.
Right.
But yeah, I forgot what that little icon meant.
Yeah.
I really did. I forgot even though I had the words there, I look at it like I don't know what that is.
Well, we've got a dissenter in the Q&A. Bob Sly says that he's always had issues with the start menu because he works at IT for a large enterprise, and the start menu gets full and out of control pretty quickly. So ever since Windows 95, they've placed enterprise app shortcuts in a folder on the desktop, and basically says they brought back a monster. That's a fair point, Bob. Yeah. I think that's absolutely a fair point. It can
you know what
get
else gets out of control quickly? The start screen.
Yes, I was going to say.
Tons of apps. It's like this never-ending thing.
It is. No, and then the problem, of course, you never had any real apps on the start screen, right? Like, that was the problem. Like, none of your enterprise apps ever got updated for Metro. So, modern.
I mean, you could create an icon for the start screen, but yeah, it wouldn't do it.
Microsoft's own research, this was the research leading up to this decision to get rid of the start button and start menu, was that people were not using it in favor of things that were pinned to their taskbar that were their most used apps. So they thought they were on solid ground when they got rid of this thing. And, I think they 1, they really, the search was such a key thing that, like, you hit
Yes.
that button and you type in what you're looking for, and up it comes, and you hit enter and you go. Uh, and but I also think that there was something about having a much more open landscape for putting the icons that you need to access every day.
Yes.
A person's Windows desktop became a reflection of their personality. How
Yes.
organized they are, if they know the few apps they need to use, if they know a lot of apps they need to use, if they had a lot of, they had not just, they had photos, they had, but it was their playground. It was their choice where they put things, what was on. So it wasn't just the fact that they got rid of the start button and the start menu, it was that they got rid of, or they really shunted the Windows desktop to the
Yes.
side, as
It
if
became
that
a second-class
wasn't.
citizen, right? As if it was no longer a thing. Yeah.
And that was probably one of their most defining features, one of the most critical features, and it was something that made the system truly usable. And they were like, nah, it's not that usable, and you don't really need the space
Right.
around create for tiles. You don't need to use that.
Hmm.
No, exactly. So and kind of speaking of that, I mean, I think this leads into our next topic. I wrote an article. I mean, this is one of the first things I noticed, and a lot of us were kind of making jokes on Twitter about the fact that Windows 10 and OS 10, they have a lot of similarities, right? And some of the Windows fans gave me a hard time for this, but I feel like I was pretty fair, showing that they both have stolen from one another. But to your point, Lance, about kind of Microsoft kind of eschewing and making the desktop a second-class citizen last release, it seems like for the desktop operating systems, not mobile, but desktop operating systems as they exist now, they're coming together more than ever before. And I wanted to kind of get, all of you, your feedback, because all of us, use multiple devices. I think most of us here are, with the exception of Lance, are primarily Mac users, but we do all use Windows too. So what do you think about, was I completely out of my mind when I said that, Windows 10 and OS 10 look more alike than ever before, or is that true, or am I nuts? Let me know.
Yeah, I mean, no, I think you're right. I think it's basically, um, almost an admission that Apple did the right thing, and
Yeah.
we all kind of know they did, in sort of keeping their desktop system separate from their mobile stuff. And I remember writing about Windows 8, and now they're much more different than they ever have been, and now they're basically back. Okay, wait a minute. Yes, now they're much more alike than they ever have been. And I think it's a couple. And the thing is, though, I love what you wrote, Christina, about how Microsoft, one thing they do have right is the cloud.
Yeah.
And Apple has really just caught up, with iCloud Drive, and they were doing lots of cloud stuff, but it's like the way they organized it, the way developers were using it, wasn't quite in sync with how the world is sort of expecting these systems to work. But Microsoft has been doing cloud for just as long, if not longer, and now that with OneDrive, I got to say what you will about Windows 8 machines, the way they use OneDrive post Windows 8.1 has been pretty spectacular. I mean,
Yeah,
they get it right.
Very big fan of OneDrive. As with me being probably the most consistent Windows user of the bunch, although I've certainly used a lot of Macs, and I think they're actually excellent systems as well. The great benefit going from system to system has been OneDrive, because my goal is to store as little as possible locally. And with Microsoft's OneDrive, it becomes truly possible. And because of the way they've set up Windows 8, with it being the default
Mm-hmm.
place to store stuff, that becomes possible. And I think it's the wave of the future. We were just talking about, Christina and I had this conversation about this bad USB, this hack for USB drives, because people are passing around files on USB, and sometimes they're even, because they have multiple systems, they're taking a file home on a USB and then bringing it to another system. But if you're using cloud-based storage, you don't have to do that. So Microsoft has really embraced this concept, and they've done it for so long now that I think that they have the cleanest, most well thought out, and recognizable system. There's nothing confusing about it. It just looks like a bunch of folders that
Right.
you can manage, and you can access it anywhere. And so I think that is a real benefit of the system, and I think it'll be a big benefit of Windows 10.
Yeah. Now, and Carissa, I know that at the event, you commented, you were live tweeting that somebody had asked a question if Microsoft felt like Apple was a big threat, and that they seemed uncomfortable with that response. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, he said we're really just trying to listen to consumers and give them what they want, and he, very much sidestepped any Apple comparison. But they definitely looked like they were squirming a little bit at being asked that directly.
No, and I mean, I think that, the fact that they kept using the term familiar over and over again, I think that's a kind of a key point. Pete, as he alluded to, we've written and talked a lot about how, what Apple's strategy was versus Windows strategy, very, very different. And clearly, I think, Windows 10 is the ultimate mission that Apple was right, that people do want their desktop experience to be a certain way, and they don't want it to be intrinsically tied to their mobile experience. I think what'll be interesting, I think, will be how they truly do handle the touch stuff going forward, because they made points to say, hey, touch isn't going away. We still are going to be supporting touch, but how that's going to differ and how that's going to work alongside, this new, desktop embraced focus is going to be interesting. So kind of in that same vein, Lance, you wrote a great article about, how with Windows 10, Microsoft is finally getting it right, and that they're finally getting it. Do you want to kind of expand on that and give us a little bit of your thesis? I know we've kind of talked around that, but you want to kind of give us like the high level, like what you meant with that article, because it was a great post. It got shared a ton, and you've been covering this stuff, from the beginning, and you're totally dead on with it. So tell us a little bit about this article.
Well, as I said, when you look at Windows, the current Windows, say Windows 8, as a platform, as an operating system, you realize that underneath the kernel, the way it's architected, is very solid. And what I mean by that is the system loads extremely fast. It shuts down fast. They've figured out ways to run it on systems where it would have been impossible years ago. And they really kind of made this breakthrough with Windows 7, but they continued it with Windows 8. When I think about, I'm doing this Hangout right now through a Surface Pro 3 that is not only doing that, but it's running in the background Photoshop, Word, a bunch of Chrome, Notepad, Notebook. It's running a second screen over here. I've connected a mouse and a keyboard via Bluetooth, the mouse at least. It's doing all that, and it's not suffering in any way. It is a full-blown system, and that is really because of the architecture. Now, the things that bother people the most, and in a way this is one of the toughest things to do, is the interface. And Microsoft fought the good fight. It really did. It explained itself like crazy in 2011 when it was trying to tell people why it was a good idea to make this change, to get rid of the start button, to get rid of the. And as I said, what they failed to realize is how, that was part of the Windows identity. And it was something that people fully embraced. Yeah, they will. It's a fungible system that people can customize it. They've always been able to customize it, and they will put icons here and pin things there. But ultimately, they understood it. And Microsoft it was like they stuffed something in their ears, and then all they could hear was touch. They became obsessed with touch, I think. And that was partly because Microsoft was so far behind on mobile. And they felt they had solved something with Windows Phone, and so I had actually said that it would be a great interface for a tablet, but I didn't expect them to obliterate the Windows desktop in favor of it, and that's really what they did. So they've come around for any number of reasons, and this is where I don't want to get really too far into speculation, but look, Steven Sinofsky, who ran the Windows Group, is gone. Steve Ballmer, who ran Microsoft, is gone. Satya Nadella seems extremely pragmatic. And one thing I can tell is the guy doesn't have a tin ear. I think he gets it. He knows how to talk to his customers, and I think he knows how to actually listen to his customers, not his salesman. And I won't say who I'm talking about there, but salesman.
I think we all know. I think we all know.
I think he made a choice, and I think he said, "This is what we're going to do." maybe bumped it. I don't know, but I think that Satya is finishing it, and I think that Microsoft has woken up to the fact that you have to, give people what they want while still advancing the art. And I think they're doing that here. I really do. I have high hopes for Windows 10. I'm not a Windows 10 booster. I'm not a Windows booster. I'll use any system that I think is really good as long as I can get the job done. But I think Microsoft has something good here. And I think that businesses in particular are going to be pleased. And I think that they're going to look to this, and they're going to have enough time to do it, as their next big OS, as the one they adopt in 2015 and 2016. So, yeah,
Well, that's really going to be the measure of the
Right.
success of Windows 10.
I,
And
I
it's
was
not going to be in units sold. It's not going to be whether it saves the PC market. It's going to be how many enterprise customers have upgraded 6 months, a year, 2 years after its general release.
You're dead on. And so that was, yeah, I mean, you actually go into what my next question was going to be, Pete, and we'll start with you. But I mean, do we feel like, to Lance's point, feel like they're finally getting it? Is this enough? Is this too late? Have they done enough, and are they doing enough early enough to show this off? I mean, clearly, Windows 10. People are asking questions in the chat about voice capabilities, and they're asking about security. The truth of the matter is, this is so early. Just to give you an idea of how early it is, there's a lot of stuff from Windows 8 still around that they clearly haven't gotten around to changing. That they know that they will change. But the fact that they're showing it off this early, to me, indicates that they know that they have to get the enterprise people on board. Do we think this is enough? Is this going to be enough, and are they doing it fast enough, or is it too late? And I'll start with you, Pete. Do you think this is going to be, let's
I'm
go into speculation
skeptical,
mode?
more skeptical than Lance, just because I feel like a lot of what I've heard from Satya Nadella and what Windows 10 is supposed to do, and I'm speaking sort of broadly, not the specific features, it sounds like we've heard this before. Windows 8 was supposed to do a lot of this. It didn't. 8.1 did some fixing. 8.1 update did even more fixing. But I mean, it's still not, I know Windows 10 is bringing back the desktop and all this other stuff. I'm just like, there's these subtle things that I think they're not going to quite get right because they haven't given me a reason to trust them. And one of the things is still like, Lance is right. I mean, it was well meant. Like the phone worked well. They had to catch up. They needed to jumpstart their tablet platform. All this kind of made sense. The phone stuff isn't doing super great as well. It's done okay, but I mean, it's still not a credible third OS. And honestly, I'd love to hear what Carissa thinks in terms of like what are you hearing in terms of like developers and like Windows Phone in particular, and what Windows 10 means for them, and like is it the big promise of Universal Windows app? How meaningful is this? How meaningful is this to the desktop?
I was going to say, can we call BS on the Universal Apps thing first?
Yes,
I mean, because I feel like we need to call BS on it. They've been promising this for years now, and it's not happening. It hasn't created. There's
my
this
thing
great
with
idea.
Universal Windows apps is that how meaningful are for the vast majority of apps, which
That's
is
exactly
just live in the desktop. Who gives a crap about
precisely, and not only that, but you've had some really good mobile apps the way the desktop, but even more desktop apps that have never even migrated to the Metro thing. So yeah, I mean, I think we have to call BS on the Universal Apps thing. But Carissa, I'm with Pete. I'd love to hear from you. You talked to developers. You were at the event. Does this seem like something that they actually have a chance of gaining back mind share and market share, or is this kind of have they lost a lot of both the developer sentiment that they were so strong at for so long, and have they lost the enterprise thing too? I mean, what have you been hearing? Where do things stand?
I mean, it seems like it's still very early on to really know for sure. I mean, they did say that Windows 10, it will be, on Windows Phone, it will be powering Internet of Things, which is really interesting, but they didn't really go any deeper than that. One interesting that did come up was that I think later that day, there was another report that said that Cortana will be part of Windows 10 when it ships, which at the time at the event, I asked specifically about Cortana, and they said, not right now. They didn't say yes, they didn't say no. But it sounds like that will be a big feature that they're looking to put on Windows 10. So, I mean, it's kind of interesting because, Cortana works pretty well on Windows Phone, actually, but, how that interface will work on a desktop, is still, pretty unclear.
I mean, the idea of voice control on a desktop operating system, voice recognition, is not at all new.
No.
I mean, it goes back to OS2.
I think it actually goes back to 1966 when Star Trek first.
Well, we mean in the real world, Pete. But,
Right.
but it's not. The only new part of it is that there's a voice responding to you, which is not really an innovation per se, but it's fun. It makes it more personable and interesting. But I feel a little bit like with the universal apps, maybe we're missing the point here. To me, I think of it as you have a core kernel that is consistent across all platforms. What that would mean is if I write an app for the desktop, there's a part of it for calls to, for example, OneDrive, I do not have
Sure.
to do again. So I can reuse a portion. No matter what, the interface, the skinning is going to be different. There are going to be parts that are going to be different, but key calls, libraries, dynamic language libraries, things that link libraries, I should say, that you have DLLs, things like that may not have to be redone.
Right.
Now that's my basic understanding of what I think is happening, and if that's the case, I think we're being unfair because it's not the idea of, oh, why would I need Photoshop? I got a full-size Photoshop on the desktop. What do I need on the phone? Well, no, you're not going to get that. What you're going to get is Photoshop Express, but there's going to be a kernel of it. There's going to be a part of it that's the same because they were able to just reuse.
Well, but here's my devil's advocate. I mean, is that design? You're saying the design, the UI is different. That has to be part of the fundamental process and thought process of any app at this point in time. I mean, you could be back in the old days of Microsoft. Yeah, you could maybe get away with let's throw on a UI at the end, and it's like absolutely not anymore. Any developer will tell you. Design has to be part of this process from the outset.
We could argue this all day long. I do not agree with you, Pete.
You don't think design?
No, I totally.
Are you kidding me?
No.
In 2014, you're arguing design isn't a fundamental part of development from the start?
Actually, I do think it is. But, for example, if you build a website, say you build it on top of what's called a CMS-like vignette. You don't actually change Vignette, but you spend a tremendous amount of time working on your interface. The stuff calls into it. Yet Vignette is used across all of these other sites, or WordPress, for example.
Well, totally. Well, we're talking about and I hear what you're saying, Lance. But here's my question. I mean, putting aside the differences of whether we're talking about design and having things really look the same or not, here's the reality. Microsoft's been saying developers can build on the same code base, share code, which is all great. That's all fantastic. Except no one's doing it. Except everybody's still building apps the same way.
No, because one, no one adopted Windows 8.
Well,
two,
right.
They're still struggling to get people to adopt Windows Phone.
So this is my point then. If no one's doing it, they've had this for 2 years now, where they've been saying everybody move to this type of library, and everybody is still building traditional Windows apps, and nobody cares about the new code sharing, the new code processes, or cares about the new touch stuff. Is this going to be enough to move the needle, especially in enterprise, where a lot of times they're using really far back versions of C#?
That goes back to what Pete said, and where he's exactly right, that it's all going to be about adoption.
Right.
If enterprises don't adopt it, it's not going to work.
To me, that's why I've been calling BS on I guess, universal apps, is because I feel like if no one's building these universal apps, it's great that it's there. It definitely is, but I just feel like at a certain point we have to call the baby ugly, and at this point the baby's pretty ugly. I'm just saying.
Never call the baby ugly.
All right, so we're kind of winding down, but I kind of want to, kind of looking through some of our comments that we're getting. People are talking a little bit about, going from, people are talking about the color scheme and how some of that stuff works. Just want to clear that up real quick. Right now, this is beta, but basically Windows will take on its own theme based on your colors, and that's how the start menu will be colorized. But you can also kind of choose your color the same way you could with the start screen, so you can make that look. There's even a awesome, very cool scenes from Yosemite theme available in the Windows library. That was actually available before Yosemite was even announced as the name for OS 10, but it is pretty funny that you can have Yosemite backgrounds on your Windows desktop.
I have one more thing I want to just bring
go
up,
on.
and and I realize development cycles for Windows, and you have year-long rollouts, and that this is what happens, but I feel like now more than ever, in this particular time, Microsoft has kind of really just Osborne itself. I mean, you
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like, who is going to buy a
I was
Windows
actually
8
going to ask
machine?
that. I was going to ask that.
Yeah, and between now and then. And the other thing I just want to add to this is something, I forget who brought up wearables quickly, but it's like, yeah, I mean, wearables, unless Microsoft does something between now and the general release of Windows 10 that is a pure wearables initiative, and they might at next year's build. They probably will. But it's like, how they're going to be so far behind. This is going to be 6 months after the Apple Watch comes out.
Yeah, but
You know, and it's like, who's going to bother with Microsoft wearables by
yeah,
then?
well, who is bothering with wearables right now anyway? I mean, that
Right.
this market is. I think that Microsoft probably recognizes what we all know is that there's a lot of headroom there at this point because
Sure.
consumers have
Wait
not
until February.
adopted. What's that?
Right.
Wait until February. If
Wait
you
until the
waited,
iWatch.
like, this is
Well-
all happening post Apple Watch, excuse me?
Yeah, I got it wrong too.
Look, I think Apple Watch looks great, but I don't know that that's the big turning point for this whole wearables category. For Apple, that is probably one of the biggest risks I've ever seen them take.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with
but,
you. I'm
Sure.
trying to, yeah. So we will talk more about the Apple Watch in future Hangouts. I don't mean to cut you off, Lance, but we've got only a couple minutes. We want to go ahead and get everybody's final thoughts. But I'm with you on that. It is a big risk, but we'll talk about that in a future Hangout, not during the Windows Hangout. We don't want to devolve into one of those things. Don't hate us, Windows lovers. We love Microsoft. We love Windows 10. So real quick,
I just want to see a good Microsoft wearable.
Thank you. You know what? I just want to see a good Microsoft product. I want to see a really well-formed Microsoft product because they do a lot of great things. I want to see all the pieces come together, and I have a feeling that Windows 10, that's what they're going to do. It's shaping up that way. I do worry about them Osborning themselves, as you said, Pete, because at this point, who's going to buy a Windows 8 machine? You might as well just get it pre-installed with Windows 7, and that would be a more, that would be a better upgrade cycle maybe for those types of users. But let's go around. I just want to get all of you. That's my final thought. I just want to get you guys' final thoughts as we close out and kind of what you're thinking from all of this. And so, Carissa, we're going to start with you.
Yeah, I think it's gonna. You mentioned this earlier, but it's still a really early build. There's still a lot of changes they're gonna make. Even when I was there demoing it, they would point out certain things. They said, oh, that might go away. That that might stay. We don't know. It kind of depends. So I think right now they're just really testing it out, looking for feedback, trying to get everyone's input, and then kind of go from there. But I feel like I've seen this before, just on the app side from things they've launched recently. Really trying to emphasize wanting to get as much feedback as possible to make things right, and I think that's something that they definitely emphasized during the event. So I think that's at the very least a positive sign for Windows users.
Definitely. So in Chris's own words, listen to her. You guys, if you're trying out the preview build, which don't put on your main system, but if you're trying it out, leave feedback. Microsoft wants your feedback. All right, let's go to Pete. Pete, what's a final thought? Take a big takeaway. What are you thinking?
Yeah, well, Carissa, an excellent point in that this is because of they're very sincere this time, clearly about we want to get this right. We want to talk to our community. Very smart. So they have the best chance they've had from the last Windows is to get this right now. I just feel like I say, it's a year from now. It's going to be like Microsoft was already playing catch up, and by a year from now, it's like, look out. I mean, there's going to be such a gap. I feel like with certain key things that we're not even really going to be talking about desktops in the same way anymore. I mean, there's going to be other things. I don't know. I'm skeptical that I'm not skeptical that Windows 10 is going to be good and advanced, move the needle for them. I'm just skeptical whether it's going to be in time to really have Microsoft make much of a difference in the places it still wants to make a difference.
Gotcha. And Lance, let's close it out with you, big man. What do you think? Sum it up for us.
I'm going to make my comments directly to Microsoft. Microsoft, here's what I want you to do. I want you to take the positive sentiment, of which there is a surprisingly good amount, and ride that. Don't do something to reject it. Follow Carissa's advice. Actually, take all that input and use it. I also am going to recommend that you take a close look at Windows 10 and make sure that you can expunge every bit of the feeling of being in two different environments. For example, PC settings should not feel like you're jumping into a different world. So pay close attention to that stuff because that's going to be critical for your enterprise audience. And believe me, you won't upset a single Windows consumer if, in fact, you do all this. If you do these things, Microsoft, I believe that Windows 10 will be a success. And yes, you can thank me later.
All right, so Simon Cowell of the Windows World, Lance Ulanoff has spoken. Thank you, Lance, and thank you all for joining us for MashTalk. You can follow us at Mashable Tech. Obviously, circle us on Google+, and watch us on YouTube. So thank you all. If you have any further questions about Windows 10, feel free to hit us up on Twitter. Use the hashtag MashTalk, and we will see you guys next week. Thank you all for joining us.
When we go to 11.
11. All right, take care, guys.
Bye.